Hi, this is Mark J. Ryan, and welcome to Brainwashing Central, where we will explore through common sense how brainwashing, propaganda, hypnosis, priming, subliminals, NLP, and other modalities are being used to shape yours and others' behaviors. Hey everybody, this is Mark J. Ryan, and welcome to BrainwashingCentral.com. I'm going to bring back this show. I started it several years ago, and then just didn't get into it that much. Didn't get a whole lot of hits on YouTube or my blog. And then we started getting hacked on the website really bad. And YouTube decided to take down some of my videos. So I think all of them. So I said, well, right at this point in time, it's probably not good. Things were going good and economy was not too bad, but now things are getting a little strange, and I'm noticing just a massive use of brainwashing, propaganda, subliminals, NLP, hypnosis, and it's called Brainwashing Central, but overall it's going to be kind of a loose talk, more into common sense. Do you see this? Does this make sense to you? Look at your world and see if this makes sense to you. Purpose in this is to put the information out there. What you do with it is your choice. I remember years ago reading a book, many years ago, Subliminal Seduction by Brian Key Wilson. It's not the singer. It was a PhD that worked extensively with media companies to use subliminals and to use different types of mental processes or weaknesses in human mental processes to basically manipulate people to buy things. He would say, basically his premise is, why would somebody pay? And this is back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, early 70s. Why would people pay $100,000, $50,000, $150,000? Today it's in the millions for just a 30-second Super Bowl commercial. Why would they pay that much money just to tell you about the product? Would they not use the most sophisticated brain science, mind science, subliminals, propaganda, brainwashing to get that bit of information about their company into your head so that you would go out there and purchase that? And back then it was more magazines. So as a person's flipping through magazines and flipping through the pages, the ads to get to what they want to look at or what they want to read, they're going to pretty well flip by ads. They may take some time to read them, but they know most people don't read the ads. They kind of quickly look at them and then go to the next page. So they had to design something to say, what is it that the human mind can see and get kind of at a subconscious, subliminal level quickly that would the unconscious mind would remember, which the unconscious, just to start off, the subconscious mind, the unconscious mind, it takes in just a tremendous amount of information that we're not aware of. And the conscious mind, they figure about 7 plus or minus 2. I'd say in today's society, that was back in the 50s. In today's society, it's probably 1 or 2 bits of information that you can hold at one time. They talk about multitasking, but they're finding that's a myth as well. You can only do one thing at a time, but people are really good at switching back and forth. And what that can do is that can wear also on the brain. It can wear on the emotional system. People can do it really good for a while, but over a period of time, it's not really good for the system. So there's a ton of background information that's going on and things that you're not aware of. And like a magician, a good magician, if they can distract those few bits of information that you have, they can do all kinds of things with the rest of the information that you're not aware of, but yet still powerfully influences what you do. There is a great video from Darren Brown, several of them actually, where he takes people and they spend a lot of time with this. And I just remember one of them is a couple design artists that they had, some of the best design artists, and they wanted to make a new product. And so the setup was basically Darren Brown was going to have these people, and I can find a link to it if you're interested in the link to it. But if you do some searching on Darren Brown and subliminals and priming, things like that, you'll find it. So what he did was he had actually picked them up at a certain place in town and then brought them to these design offices, and then used a little bit of wording, subliminal wording and things along the way, and while he was there, and said, this is the kind of design that I'm looking for. Well, ahead of time, he had already said, this is what they're going to design, this is what it's going to look like, and he predicted what was going to happen based on the information that he was flowing into them. In today's topic, basically, we're going to talk about two things, addiction and overwhelm. And so what he did was he overwhelmed them with the information he wanted them. He primed their brain and put all kinds of subliminal information and more direct information, paraliminal information in. And by the time they got done designing, he then flipped his flip chart, and it was almost identical to what they had designed, which really freaked them out. And then he said, it's more science than it is magic. Let me take you back through the process. And it takes them back through from the time that they picked him up in the cabbie. They had people along the route that they were driving that were holding certain types of balloons, wearing weird shirts. They directed their attention to animals, certain animals. And so the whole way, over and over again, they were priming the unconscious mind of these two designers with the information that he wanted them to do, plus he was talking about it. And then, unbeknownst to them, when they got to the design shop, and he said, this is a kind of a design I'm looking for, when they designed it, and then Darren Brown flipped the flip chart over, like I said, again, they were, myself, I was just amazed. And he did this several times with people, and you can watch in the videos. So it really made me more aware as somebody that uses influence with people and then coaching and in doing therapy with people and doing the DVDs that I do and the subliminals and things like that, is I knew that they were working, and I knew that they were working well, but this really was a illustration of how well it can work if it's done properly and right, and not just being in one position in one situation, or just not looking at one magazine page or one Super Bowl commercial. But what if you really formulated a bunch of different information that kind of drove the unconscious mind into a certain decision, and these guys said, no, these are our ideas, we came up with them. But then when the flip chart was flipped and they say almost identical drawing, because this is what Darren Brown had wanted to put into their mind, it really was upsetting to them. I think it was upsetting to the audience, and to me it was upsetting, but also at the same time it was very, very exciting to see what they had done and what the difference is. And I recommend you go watch some of his stuff and how he works this, because he's a genius, he's a master at it. But going back to subliminal seduction, Brian Key, he was doing it back a long time ago, but he says, no, this has been going on for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. He brought back some classic paintings and went in there and showed how these artists knew what they call foreground and background. What is your attention going to go on in the foreground? What are you looking for? What is your mind shaped to look for in a painting? And you've got a limited amount of information that you can take in from that painting. So quickly it'll determine, like, it's a face of a human being, and maybe they're sitting in a chair in a park in ancient Rome. And so that's what your attention is going to be able to pick up on. But they've got another thing called background. So that's foreground. Then they got the background. They know that your brain is going to be overwhelmed and only see those things. And once it gets conditioned to look at it, it's hard to see anything else. This is a really important point. It's hard to see anything else, because your brain wants to pick out something, put a meaning on it, generalize it, make it automatic, and put it in your brain and have amnesia for it. And that way you're going to just see it like that all the time. It wants to make a really quick assessment, forget about it, and put it in the back of your brain. This again is really, really huge, because the whole premise of what we're doing with propaganda and brainwashing and understanding it in this podcast is to get certain big points, major points, where you can kind of back up and look at the bigger picture, because we're conditioned to look at small chunks of the picture. and just say that's everything about it. Because once we get conditioned, or we condition ourselves, because it happens so automatically with the brain, that then people can then take advantage of what's in the background, what your brain is not capable of then I mean, it's not that you're not capable, because I can do it. Other people can do it, but can I do it all the time? No, I'm getting caught with this stuff all the time. It's one of the reasons I'm backing off on using my computer so much. We turned our cable off and stuff like that. I realized the influence that I'm getting. I watch, Kathy and the kids and say, okay, I know what's happening with their behavior. I got to tell you, the kids were watching Family Guy for a while. The difference in behavior was tremendous, tremendous. And so Family Guy, boom, it was cut out, and the behavior started to adjust back, but it still had incorporated some of the behavior with Family Guy. It's like once it's in there, it's real tough to take it out, but you can kind of switch it around a little bit. So anyways, the idea is that your brain does this, and we have to look at the weaknesses of who we are, and that's another thing human beings don't want to do. They don't want to think that they're weak. They don't want to think that they can be manipulated. And this works for the people that want to manipulate them, because they will say, you can't do that to me. You cannot hypnotize me. You cannot make me do that. And you know what? That's great. You go, yeah, you're right. We can't do this. All the tests we've done, we can't make you do this type of thing. We can't influence your behavior. I just was it yesterday, the day before, over the last week, I would look at Facebook and stuff in the background is going on, because I flip through it real quick, see what everybody's been up to and what's the basic themes, and then sometimes I'll repost stuff. And there is a festival going on in China right now. And for those of you that are a little bit squeamish, forgive me, and animal lovers, please forgive me, because I don't like to see it either. It's very, very upsetting to me. And what I have to do is I have to say, okay, I got to pull back from the limited amount of information that I'm getting from the press and the media, pull back and look at the bigger picture and just say, okay, how does this fit into the bigger picture? Otherwise, the foreground is going to miss me, or get me in the background I'm going to miss, because I'm having an emotional reaction to it. And I'm trained myself over years and years to recognize when I'm having an emotional reaction, sometimes more than others, and then to look at it critically in a different way, to look at it with the skills and the information that I have. So they're having this festival, and I can't remember the name of the town that it's in, but what they do is they take tens of thousands of cats and dogs, and they showed pictures of these cats and dogs in cages. I mean, dogs that you would just love to have, cats that you would just love to have as pets. And they eat them, and they celebrate them, So the whole thing is kind of like here in the United States, you got a pig roast, you got a chicken roast, you're having chicken on the barbecue so just imagine a culture that was just, well, let's take beef. We like to eat cow, we eat a lot of cow, but to the Indians, it's a horror story to them, because they worship cows. They just don't look at cows. I mean, they not only adore cows, but they worship them. And many cultures throughout the world, have no issues eating cats or dogs. But this is a massive festival where they killed, I think they said at least 10,000 cats and dogs to celebrate by eating them and cooking them in different ways. Well, to us, it's horrible. But to them, it's not an issue. They grew up with it. There's still people in the world that are eating other people. We don't want to think about that. We want to think that's an extinct type thing. But, Borneo, until recently, was known for cannibalism. So it's horrible. It's anathema. That's crazy. Same thing with these dogs. Seeing them, I had I felt like I was going to throw up. It was so emotionally traumatic to watch that and to witness that. But if you're conditioned in a proper way, and you just live in a different part of the world, and something that we look at as pets and beautiful things that we love, creatures that are alive and have faces and have mothers and things like that, but yet we're able to turn that off when it comes to cows and pigs and chickens and lamb and different things like that. We don't want to see, as long as we don't see it, What happens is in the foreground, it is a tasty, nutritious piece of food. But in the background, when a lot of times they show the conditions that these animals are raised in and what they eat and how they have to live together and the diseases and stuff like that, all of a sudden we go, ooh, it pulls in the background. But we don't want to know that. We don't want to know that. The same thing happens in war. I mean, I've worked with enough veterans to know that there's a mechanism, mainly in men, it's not so much in women, but there's a mechanism to turn off empathy in men. And I'm not sure exactly how it works. Again, I don't want to get real scientific. If you want to find out about it, go do some research on it. But men, if they're, their best friend or somebody they know is shot and killed, they have to be able to let that go in the moment and continue to go on to save their life or to fight the battle. And then over a period of time, once they get used to that, that's when we start to find out about the atrocities and the horrors of war and the bad things that happen at war, what people are willing to do because they've lost all empathy. There's not a connection to it. And just as easy as it is to kill a chicken, to them it's just as easy to kill a human being. Recently looking at ISIS, what they're doing, they just want to, show more and more how inhumane they are. Seeing people just like the dogs and the cats in the cages in China and in Syria. I think it was in Syria, it might have been Iraq, but they've got a swimming pool of water, and they built this cage, and they put all these prisoners in it, and they dropped the cage into the water and drowned all the human beings in there. So what's beginning to happen is as it comes across the news, I back up and I take a look at all this and say, okay, how does this relate back to the podcast and brainwashing and everything? It's a desensitizing. And if you want people to commit atrocities, you overwhelm them with information that desensitizes them to it. So years ago, if we would have kind of brought this reality to, let's say, our founding fathers, they would stop everything they're doing. They would pick up their arms and immediately probably be doing something about it and saying, this is not the country we founded. This is not what we wanted for the country. And they would probably do something about it. But over a progression of time, we desensitize. It's the frog in the boiling water. You throw a frog in boiling water, it's going to jump out. But if you take them over a period of time and increase the heat, the frog won't notice it, and it gets to a certain level that the frog will then die because it's become accustomed to a certain point. Personally, for me, I think that what's happening is that with Americans' health, mainly Americans, but around the world, what people are starting to do to other people, it's horrendous. And that tells me that a lot of people have become desensitized. But the danger to me is that we start to become desensitized. In the early, and we're going to talk a lot about these different subjects individually, and I'm going to take them more into depth. That is, if people want to listen to the show and it's successful, I feel like I've got some kind of an obligation to at least start to let the people know what's going on, make them more aware of it. But we look back and we say, okay, I remember I was in Texas during the early 80s. Just gotten out of college and gone down to Dallas and was in Houston in 79. Before that's when I got out of the military, 1980, somewhere in that range. And it was a whole different situation down there. But back around the mid-'80s, we had the savings and loan crisis, and that was about $300 billion. Right now, the banking crisis, we're talking trillions, some say hundreds of trillions, and people have actually put the number over 1 quadrillion, which is $1,000 trillion, which is, the output of the world. This is a year ago or 2 years ago, I read the total value of the world, the output of, what work human beings put out, plus all land, everything was put at about $150 to $200 trillion. And we're talking about some kind of a debt of quadrillion dollars. We know what happened during the 2008, 2009 with the banking crisis. But I remember that crisis back in Texas, in Oklahoma, and Arkansas, and the savings and loan crisis, mainly down south. It was up north too, but the brunt of it seemed to be down south, and in Texas, Dallas area seemed to be, the center for what happened. And years later, I actually knew some and got friends that knew some of these bankers and are still friends with them. And they kind of explained a little bit about what happened. But there was 1,000 bankers that went to prison, to jail, got prosecuted. 1,000. 2008, nothing. Nothing. Nobody. Bernie Madoff, well, he got caught in a different type of a scam, and you're talking $60 billion, people's wealth just gone, and he just spread it out and had fun, and so we know about Bernie Madoff. But excuse me, there was many, many more bankers doing much worse things with a lot more money, and none of them were prosecuted. And if there was that I'm unaware of, it was very little and minor, but nothing like what happened during the savings and loan crisis during the 80s. I mean, that was a big upset. That changed a lot of things. I actually had a business at the time, a janitorial business, where I was going in cleaning savings and loan companies. But it was a major hit. And then having some, backstories and finding out later on from people that were actually bankers and went through this, what happened, was pretty nasty. But they said, compared to what we did, this is just so many times worse than what happened back then. But so what is going on in this country that we are desensitized to it, and we're able to just continue to go on with our lives? And every day we hear the new Trans-Pacific Pact or trade, but it's the Pacific Trade Agreement. Like I said, I'm not going to get specific on things. This is more about common sense, generalities. I want you to kind of look at the overall bigger picture. I'm not going to get scientific. If you don't believe what I'm saying, go research it. And even if it's true or not true, think about the concept of what I'm saying. The bigger picture of it. Look at the overall picture and the concept, and go out and say, okay, that wasn't completely accurate, but what he said. But you know what? There's a theme to that. He's got a theme. So we look and we say something is definitely going on, and what is it? And recently, I'm working around. I work around the different points, and hopefully come back using a kind of a gestalt where you go like, okay, I get where he's going with it. I recently had some issues this spring, some just wild issues, and I don't know how or what happened, but had issues with my laptop. So I went and I redid the laptop. I opened it up, adjusted. There were some memory issues with it and everything, and I put it back together, reinstalled the operating system, Vista, updated everything. Computer went bad again. Changed hard drives, reinstalled it all. Computer went bad again. Went and got a new computer at Costco, a laptop, installed it. There was problems with that computer, so I took the computer back. Decided that, you know what, since I hadn't been on the computer a little bit, I noticed that I had a little bit more hard drive space in myself. I wasn't on Facebook so much. I wasn't on email so much. I wasn't looking at the news sites and things like that. When I looked at it with my iPhone, I didn't want to spend a lot of time on that tiny little screen and look at it. So I'm like, okay, this is not good. It frustrates me, but in another way, this is good for me. I look quickly at my emails. I don't want to click the links on some and see what webinar or seminar is out there and what new product is going on. I'll just archive it or delete it and just concentrate on the important emails. And then I came back and on my big video editing computer, that went. And then it took me days without that, and finally figured out, by the way, just to give you, hard drive issues are tough. But if you have an SSD drive, what it does to the system is completely different than, it's hard to figure out. So if you've got a blue screen of death and your computer is not working right and there's major problems, and you got an SSD drive and it's the main drive, I would unplug that first and put something new in there and see what happens. Because I got to tell you, I had experts looking at this thing and nobody could figure it out. And I finally got angry one day and just unplugged the SSD drive and said, screw it. And all of a sudden the screen changed, everything. And I'm like, oh, maybe it is the SSD drive. So anyways, I got that fixed. And then next thing you know, my daughter's laptop, which is an older laptop that we used for accounting, but we let her use to play online games and stuff, that went. And I had to reinstall and do that one 2 times. So I'm going like, okay, this is within like a month period of time. All this, so I'm thinking, okay, maybe, I've heard different stories where people say, They can't wear watches. Well, I can't wear watches. They would always break. They would stop working, electronic or ones that were wind up. They would continually stop working. And I said, screw it, I'm not wearing watches anymore. Then I've heard different stories where people say, hey, this guy can't keep refrigerators. He's gone through 4 refrigerators in a short period of time. They keep blowing circuits. And maybe energetically something was going on. But anyways, the point is that I've adjusted how much time I'm spending on the internet, and I'm realizing I'm getting some hard drive information back in my brain that I had kind of pushed out because I was spending so much time. My hard drive, my internal processors, my RAM was spending so much time on internet-related things, and I don't think it was good for me personally, mentally, spiritually. I've known people that have had regular jobs and then gone into working around computers. I got a good friend, he gained 85 pounds in a year from sitting in front of a computer. So I know the level of stress and what it caused me recently. Again, just the other day, I'd been off. I'd gone for a week seminar, spiritual seminar up in, you might hear some background noise. Early in the morning, we've got our morning things going on in the background, so we'll let that go. But I went up there, and I pretty well stayed away from the computer for a week, and then I came back, and I got on the news sites and Facebook and everything, and I've just felt these emotions come up in me. And next thing you know, I was going back into the stress mode. I was going back into a conditioned, brainwashed response mode. And even though I have to agree with a lot of the things that I look at and how they get me upset and everything, I have to say, is this good for me overall? Is this too much information? So going back to, again, what is Brainwashing Central about? What is this about? It's about how we are being overloaded with information that is in the foreground. So different things are happening in the background. So as we're looking at Caitlyn Jenner and we're looking at the shooting in South Carolina and everything, what's happening in the background? Here we go. We've got both the Democrats, Bonner, and the Republicans that you look and you say, okay, they won the elections, and why? What are they going to do? They had a specific reason. They promised certain things, and next thing you know, they just gave a bunch more power to Obama, and they're working with him, which is good in one way, but in another way, when Paul Ryan, somebody that I used to respect an awful lot, who's a Republican, says the same thing as Nancy Pelosi, who I despise, because she says, look, we'll look at Obamacare once we pass Obamacare. And he says the same thing from the other side of the aisle. There's a corruption that's going on there. There's a country club mentality that's going on. No bankers are being prosecuted. Politicians, they have free reign. There is nobody checking with them again, and they know that the American public is too overwhelmed to do anything about it. So they have free reign to go after the money and the power that they choose. So something is dramatically wrong. Corporations, there's just not any responsibility to what they're doing. And if a company can go and make different things, and I'm going to talk a little bit about pharmaceuticals and vaccines and just many different areas that we'll touch on. But to know that, okay, we went after the banks, we charged them $5 billion, but they made $45 billion. It's just a cost of doing business. Pharmaceutical companies paying out $9 billion in damages for vaccines. Well, vaccines don't do any damages. Vaccines are good. Why did they pay out $9 billion? And that's a lot of money. And everybody goes, ooh, oh, good, that nailed them good. No, they made $90 billion. So it's a cost of doing business. I'm going to go and just shut the door for a minute because we got a lot of noise in the background. Hold on. All right, I'm coming back. Looks like we're preparing for breakfast, getting some dishes cleaned up from last night. So anyways, overwhelm. There's only so much information, and I would say the powers that be pretty well know that if they keep you busy, that they can do all kinds of other things. When I went into the military, what do? They kept you busy all the time. But in the background, what were they doing? They were forming a soldier. They were creating a soldier. And they used a lot of stress. They kept you busy. They used chaos. One of the things in coaching that you do, the basic premise of the coaching is you take them from where they're at You bring them into a chaotic state, a place that they're not familiar with, and then you bring them back down into a new place. It's pretty simple. So you confuse them, bring them into chaos. Well, the first thing you do is find out where do they want to be when they come down, because they're going to be more apt to want to go into that place that they're familiar with or that they want than not. So you first find out where they're at, where they want to be. You bring them into a chaotic state where they don't know, and it's a lot easier to bring them down into the new place. And if you look at the way the society's going, if we keep the people busy, we keep their minds going, we keep them addicted, because I want to get into a little bit about addiction. But I think you have an idea, in a sense, of what I'm talking about with the overwhelm. There is so much going on. But here's the deal. When I get off the computer and I'm not on the computer and I'm at a spiritual seminar and taking a break, and I'm looking at it just to make sure that there's not any, things going on that I need to know about business-wise or with the family or emails from friends or family and things like that. But other than that, it's turned off, and I'm paying attention to my immediate surroundings, and I'm enjoying myself. And all of a sudden, something starts to come back after a few days, something that I forgot or didn't realize was missing. But if you keep people in a state of constantly being busy, constantly hitting them with different information, passing new laws, this one's doing that, you thought this person was like this, but now they're like that. And I don't even go into the entertainment industry. I'll watch a movie now and then, and I like to look at Netflix and things like that, but that's at a minimum, maybe at nighttime. There's some people that are doing this and playing video games, into sports, and totally distracted. Totally, their bandwidth, their computer is maxed out. So once it's maxed out, they don't have the ability to monitor anything else that might be going on in the background. I recently... not recent. I've seen it for a while, but I saw it again. It was a great little cartoon, and what it is it's a cartoon of a bunch of sheep in a field, and then there is a Australian sheepdog, the ones that are good for rounding up the real smart dogs. And then there's a guy on a horse on the other side of the sheep, and one of the sheep is saying to another one of the sheep that are in between, going, "I'm telling you, the guy on the horse is working with the dog." And the other one is like, no, they're not. But that's the sense of it, is that they keep them so busy running around that they don't realize that there's other forces that are working in unison to drive your thinking in a direction. Let's go back again to Borneo. Let's go back to the people in China that are doing that with the dogs. And let's go back to what we do with cattle here compared to India. So what is offensive to somebody else in one country may not be offensive and may be enjoyed and looked at from a whole different angle. So people are malleable, or very malleable. We can be manipulated. We can be covertly and directly, overtly. And it's a big thing. I can't be hypnotized. I can't be made to do different things. Well, how do you think how you think right now? Where did that come from? Because of the culture that you're in. If you were in a South American culture, an African culture, a Chinese culture, would you be doing something different? Yeah. So who you are now has been shaped, has been formulated in a certain way. And what I want to do is kind of pull that back and not say it's right or wrong how we've been shaped or who we are, but to kind of just go like, I'm very vulnerable to it. I've told the story on the podcast before. I remember just going through, and you watch that Darren Brown one, it'll get you. I was at a Walmart in Florida years ago, going down and visiting my mother, and the car that I had driven down there, I started to hear that noise that let me know that there was beginning to be a hole in the muffler, a small hole, and that a lot of times it progresses fairly quickly and it becomes a loud noise. And I was at Walmart, and I was saying, maybe I just get some of this tape. There's a certain tape. It's a high-temperature tape that you can tape around holes and mufflers to give you a little bit of time, for me to get back to New York. And people that I know that were mechanics, this is years ago, mechanics that could fix it for me at a decent price, whereas if I was in Florida, I was probably going to get taken. So I went to Walmart to look for, some tape. And as I'm going through the Walmart, I catch myself singing this little song to myself. which is it's a weird statement in itself. But I'm going down the aisles and I'm singing a song. There's one that Dirty Water that's been coming up in my head, and it's an old song of I can't remember the name of the group, something else, the Credells or whatever, but it's about Boston. Boston, you're my home, Dirty Water. You look it up on YouTube and listen to it, and I'm like, where is this coming from? But I'm seeing Boston in my awareness all over the place. I'm like, what is going on with Boston? How did Boston get into my awareness, and why am I seeing it everywhere? Why is my reticular activating system that notices things like it's the same? That's the thing that when you buy a car, you buy a new car, and you're driving, and all of a sudden you see that car everywhere, and that was going on. But I was down in Florida at this Walmart, and all of a sudden I'm singing. I hear myself singing a song. And it's like, I'm not going to pay a lot for this muffler. I'm not going to pay a lot for this muffler. Meineke muffler. Well, Meineke muffler's back up in the Northeast, and they run a lot of commercials. And the cable we have up there, they're mainly like New York, city area, New Jersey, and the tri-state area there. But they spread out a little bit. But here I am in Florida with my muffler going, and I've got this commercial with this little jingle and people, saying, I'm not going to pay a lot for this. I'm not going to pay a lot for this muffler. And I started laughing because I was like, you know what? If there was a Meineke here, I would drive to their shop and say, fix my muffler. I'll pay the extra money. If you can get into my head, and at the perfect time when I need a muffler, I'm singing your jingle, you earn my money. And that again increased my interest to say, where some people want to forget that. They don't want to know. They're afraid to know that they can be manipulated at this level. So we will block that. We'll put it as a traumatic event, and we can block this stuff in our minds. And this is how we're taken advantage of. The first thing we have to do is say, I can be manipulated. I am manipulated. I have been manipulated, and I probably will be. But is it the direction I want to be manipulated in? And what I'm starting to see in the world is that we're being moved into directions that were being moved into in the past that created lots of people to die. Lots of things that we say that we want the world to be all one in one big place and a beautiful place, but the manipulation that's being used and the way we're being used and the way we're being from the top, almost, you look at the banking thing, nobody did anything about it. They took total advantage of this country, and there were so many people in this country, and they lost their life savings and blah, blah, blah. All that stuff. But for nobody to be arrested, nobody to be jailed, besides Bernie Madoff, maybe, and maybe a few other ones, that says that there is now, from their position, not much respect for human nature, maybe not much more respect than what those Chinese people had for the dogs, like where we have a certain respect. What's happening is we're being conditioned, we're being manipulated, we're being shaped to go a certain way. But the way it's being done, there is a lack of empathy for human rights. And this is where it starts to get me to the point I'm saying, okay, that's my personal thing. Maybe you don't believe that. But start to take a look, start to listen a little bit and to say, hey, look, I don't want to stop bankers from being bankers. I don't want to stop government people or the military or anything like that. It's just like, let's go back to some parameters that we know. I mean, the founders of this country studied human nature. And yeah, there's stuff that they did that wasn't that great. But if you put all your attention on that little bit of what they didn't do right instead of what they did right for human nature, for humanity, then you're going to come up with all kinds of arguments, and you're not going to care about the background of how beautiful this Constitution was. And yeah, there were mistakes, and it's not perfect. And but if we go back and we look at the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence and what that says about human, you're not going to get much better than that. It's been the best in humanity that we've ever experienced, and we think we're going to create something better than that, but we're not taking in history. We're not taking in history, and we trust the leaders and we trust the people that are there, not because we want to trust them, but because we're so preoccupied with everything else that they can pretty well do what they want. Like the guy on the horse, like the dog, we're being the sheep. We can be rounded up. We can be manipulated. And I guess this is a time to bring up Temple Grandin. Temple Grandin is a lady, I believe she's autistic. And again, we're going to go into each one of these points a little bit more, and maybe not. Maybe if people don't listen to the show and they don't care about this, I'm not going to keep going with it. But if they are, I'll keep talking about it. You got questions, and you tell people about the show, and it grows. I'll keep doing it. If not, I've got other things I can do. But she was autistic, and she paid attention to what worked with her to make her feel better. And she realized a lot of times that, if something was holding her in and touching her, she built these boxes where it would kind of like put pressure on her from the front and the back, where she felt almost where normally a normal person might say, get me out of here, I'm a little too constricted. For her, it worked for her and made her calm down from her autism. Well, she kind of turned her behavioral research with herself and with humans into animals. She had a sense. She could sense stuff about animals that, because of the way her brain was set up and her configuration, to look at patterns in animals and realize what was going on with them. And being a meat eater herself, but she did not like what was going on and how we treated cattle and pigs and different animals, and how upset they would get. And she also said, when they have real high adrenaline, that the meat gets tougher and it doesn't taste as good, and people can taste it in there, so you want to keep the animals as calm as possible. And so she decided to get into animal husbandry, and she got degrees in how to design yards before they go in for into the I can't remember what they're called, but where meat processing plants, and they kill the animals. Well, a lot of times the animals would become aware that something was going on. They would hear the other animals screaming. There would be noise. They would be visual triggers that would get them to know that something was going on. These animals would get upset. They get the adrenaline going, and again, the meat would get tough. But she said, she understood about the meat getting tough and the adrenaline in the cattle and the different animals. But she, as an autistic person, could feel the pain the animals were going through. So her deal was to say, look, I like to eat meat. Meat eating's not going to stop. People are going to continue to eat meat, but how can I make this easier for the animals? How can I make them less aware? But the end of the line, they're still putting a metal stud in the middle of a brain of the animal, like a bullet, but it's a metal stud with an air gun into the brain of the animal that dies. But what they want to do is they want to keep them quiet. They want to keep them easy. And so she found out that, if animals didn't see certain things, human beings sitting on top of the gates, if they were in chutes that were curved instead of straight and had some certain textures. So she had made all these discoveries about how to round up cattle, how to take them off cattle trucks, how to put them on cattle trucks, but also when they're going into the corral and then into the meat processing plant, you see the difference. You can watch videos, go search Temple Grandin, and you'll see all kinds of videos about what she does, and they show you actually. There's one of them that's fairly graphic, showing these processing plants and how these cattle are just calm as can be, walking to their deaths and having no ideas to it. So what she's done is taken technology, she's taken psychology and what we know about animals and how hunters do the same thing. They'll track a deer over a period of time, and then they'll put a feeder there maybe. But the other hunters that don't want to use feeders and make it easy, they'll track the deer, and they'll find that the deer has certain patterns. And what they'll do is they'll then wait in a tree and wait for the animal to come back around. They usually walk in a big circle, the deer, let's say deer. Throughout the day, they'll go all over, but they've done a lot of research to show that usually the animal they'll go pretty well the same path, even though it looks like it's not a perfect circular path, but they end up going in one big circle. So knowing that, then you can kind of bypass that. Well, what if we had that same information about human beings? We don't study human beings, do we? Pavlov didn't study it. The Russians didn't study it. The Germans didn't study human beings and their behavior and do horrible, wicked things to human beings. The Chinese probably didn't do that. How were the Chinese able, through the Korean War, able to convert so many? That was one of the big things when our soldiers were being converted and saying things against America, and they weren't really being tortured. This was just psychological manipulation and shaping to get them to write letters about Americans and give away secrets and stuff like that. And these guys said, "God, we knew we were doing it. We're sorry we did it, but we don't know how they were." So there is a level of information to shaping not just animals, but shaping human beings. And again, if you can convince people, a Patty Hearst, who was, William Randolph Hearst, who, if you come out here in California, you got San Simeon, which is just this massive castle, just one of the most beautiful houses on the planet. It's a castle, actually, but it was his summer house or whatever. But his granddaughter was kidnapped by a bunch of people, and then, very smart, very well educated. Next thing you know, she's got a machine gun in her hand, and she's fighting for him. That's in a short period of time. She's robbing banks for him. So the first thing we have to do is to say we are vulnerable. Maybe not as vulnerable as other people, and maybe certain areas of our life we're not as vulnerable, but other areas we're extremely vulnerable. And what can we be shaped into? So if they can figure that out with cattle, they can figure that out with different animals, and deer hunter can figure all these university studies and tests. Look, I've been doing this stuff for years and years, and the amount of information that's out there that just take tiny percentage of influencing behavior. Some of the people that I listen to and that I study under, they're saying, 5, 10, 15% shift, and that this is huge. It's massive. Why? Well, because, in an election, if you can shift somebody 5, 10, 15%, you won the election. But there's a lot of other things that it comes to that where something's tipping, where if you use a little bit of influence and behavior, background information that can, like the Darren Brown videos, that can shape people to move in a certain direction. And the thing is, that is not going to stop. That's going to continue. It's been going on for thousands of years. It will continue to go on. The question is if you have the knowledge of this happening and you're able to stand back a little bit and look at it and say, is this what I want for myself, for my city, my state, my country, my world? And who's doing it? And do they have the right to do that? Is it kind to human beings and individuals? Sometimes you got to force people to do certain things. Certain companies or corporations are putting lead in paint, and they're finding out that it's affecting people's brains. You got to force the behavior. And with human beings, sometimes, you get too many people in one area and they're rioting. You got to force the behavior in a certain way. However, if we have corporations that are running the government and they're shaping behavior that says, look, where we want to pass certain trade bills that we don't have any resistance to, we want to get certain drugs and chemicals passed through and on the market, like Vioxx, and then you find out that they've got a whole team of manipulating that. If a doctor starts to say, look, I'm having adverse reactions with my patients and something's going, this is not a good drug, they've actually got a ton of money where they can put into psychologically going and attacking that doctor and discrediting him. So all across it, so other doctors then begin conditioned to say, just shut up and don't say anything if you see bad reactions happening. Do we want our doctors to be handing out all kinds of pharmaceuticals to people and not be aware of it because they've been consciously or unconsciously conditioned by noticing, oh my gosh, these other doctors are having all these things happening to them when they say something about Vioxx. I'm just going to keep my mouth shut and keep dispensing it and making money. Well, I've also got a secondary gain because I'm getting vacations paid for by this company, and so it just makes it that much easier to not report something like that. And so when corporations are starting to not have regulatory things, or let's say somebody in government, let's take the tax thing, the IRS tax thing. A lot of you think, well, there was nothing much to that. No. What it did was go after a bunch of nonprofit companies and it kept them from being in business, and their job was to go out and inform people about their side of the equation. Do we want to take free speech away? Do we want companies, or do we want government agencies or unions, anybody to be able to take that much power and add it to psychological manipulation? and brainwashing and propaganda and be able to move it in that direction. If you're a liberal, if the Republicans are doing this and it's all one side, and next thing you know, they get in power and they're taking over. If you're on the other side of the equation, or a conservative or a libertarian, you look at both sides and go, I don't want either side doing this. But first you have to be aware of what they're doing. Like the sheep with the dog and the guy on the horse. The guy says, I think they're working together. We've got to start looking at what's going on, how it's going on, who's working together. Business is going to go on. Government's going to go on. Corruption is still going to go on. But it's the amount of it. It's getting to the level of corruption right now where there's nobody. The foxes are in charge of the hen house. And we're being distracted intentionally not to see this stuff so it can continue to go on. The problem is that at a certain level, and we've seen this throughout history, at a certain level, once power reaches that level and there's nobody checking them, we're either going to end up being in war with other countries, and at this level of the way the world is and the weapons that are out there, we do not want that. Or we start to have a Saddam Hussein. We start to have the guy from North Korea there. We have a Hitler. We have a Stalin. I mean, we think, well, Hitler and Stalin, that's not going to happen anymore. We got the internet and stuff like that. Yeah. The NSA doesn't have control of every bit of information that's going on there. And we take that information, we think, well, what can they do with it? There's a lot of stuff you can do with it. You just need to change the public opinion a little bit, 5, 10, 15%. There's something new we're going to be talking about called astroturfing. You know, astroturfing is a bunch of people. You got hundreds, thousands of people sitting at phone rooms and on computers waiting that as soon as something comes out that doesn't look good for a certain corporation or a certain political party or a political individual, they start hitting the blogs. They start hitting Facebook. And what it does is the initial impression, again, the brain wants to take the initial bit of information, make a decision with it, generalize it. So if they come back later on and say, sorry, that information was completely wrong, just like Michael Gruber, who was big in the campaign and Obamacare. And they said, no, Obama said, no, he had nothing to do with it. They completely lied. But while the situation was hot, if we'd have found out Gruber had more to do with it, and he's saying, look, the American people are stupid and we got to condition them and we got to force them to go a certain way, and basically just horrible things, and saying this is how we got to work it because the American people will never go for it if they really know what's going on. Just like the cows won't go for it if they know, oh, this is so nice and smooth and it's going to work out so well. And so look who's taking care of the walls. They're nice and curvy, smooth texture, but you're going to your death. You're going to your death. If we found out that stuff was going on with Gruber and all that stuff, we'd start to look more critically at the situation. But now that it's passed and we find out about it, I watched on the news and they're all laughing about it. And the guys are like, yeah, we got to apologize. They did lie. It was an out and out lie. And then they want to use a little bit of manipulation and say, well, he wasn't forthright with the information. Screw that. Screw that shit as far as I'm concerned. Wasn't forthright with, no, he lied. Intentionally, they lied to get something done to pass. To me, why not? Let's say, okay, if that's what happened, let's back this thing up. If this is what politicians are doing, let's not say, well, this is what we got and this is what we got to do and we got to go forward with it. No. Back that thing up, cancel it, start again. What's the information? No passing any bills and then reading it afterwards. Republicans and Democrats alike, no, that time has to stop. We have to start paying attention. We have to start turning off the TV, turning off the computer and the internet and say what's going on behind in the background that we don't know about. This is going to affect me. But more so, you care more about your kids and your grandkids. You care about your nieces and nephews and the young people in this country. Because if you don't do anything about it, you're just feeding your kids to the alligator. You're trying to get away from it, not having to deal with it now, but they're going to have to pay the consequences of it. This is the Pied Piper. You know, the Pied Piper is to say, go in and try to change things and get things a certain way. And the people didn't go with it. So the Pied Piper said, okay, that's fine. I'll take your kids. I'll take your kids. These stories are there for reasons. We think they're just nice little stories. And, you know, these stories are telling us stuff. People have been telling us things through stories, through myths for years and years and years. And there's nasty stuff going on. Anyways, it's 54 minutes. I figured this was going to be, I actually have a sticker on there, 36 minutes. That's the average that people will listen. Hopefully I got you to listen to 54 minutes. And I'm going to take a few more minutes. I'm going to read a little piece that Kathy, my wife, sent me. And I kind of looked at the whole brainwashing thing a little bit differently once I read this, because I was saying to her, I says, it's more like when I'm dealing with people with addiction, and I use thumbtacks sometimes, and I'm getting a lot of people. I'm not using them, I'm experimenting with it, seeing what it is, and it's for people that want different things. And because I'm listening to hypnotherapy, I get people. There's a little alerts that they send me, say, look, Justin S. from Austin is looking for a hypnotherapist. And one thing after another, I've probably gotten a good 100 leads from this company, Thumbtack people. And I would say 90 out of the 100 have all been about addiction. I'm addicted to something. So I'm going to read this, and then I'll sign off for this. And what I'd like to hear from you is things that I've talked about, things I haven't talked about. What do you want to hear more of? I feed off of what the listener wants, and I can adjust and I can shape myself into that information. It doesn't have to be everything. I'll keep putting stuff out that I want to put out that I think is interesting. But your input helps me keep going with the show. It also helps me determine what I'm going to talk about, what you're interested in. Because if you're interested, probably other people are interested in it. So those 90 of 100 people that kept coming in about addiction, I'm thinking, yeah, this is it. This is addiction. This is addiction to feelings, addictions to certain ways of thinking, because that's what it is. And then I came across this article. Kathy sent me, she goes, I just read an article that sounds really close to what you just described. And I said, send it to me and I'll take a look at it. So it's going to take me a few minutes to go through this article, but just pay attention to this. And then I'll sign off. And then, like I said, where it goes from here is going to be dependent on you. What do you want to hear about? What do you like? What didn't you like? And I've got a bunch of books that I want to start going through and take those apart a little bit at a time, because the information there's a tremendous amount of it there. But as you get more and more of it, just listen to it. I'm going to put it as best I can in common sense language and everyday language, and where you can begin to start seeing it. Because the other end of the equation is that I work a lot with spirituality. And when I'm working with people, helping them through coaching and therapy and stuff like that, is how do I wake people up? Well, the first thing they got to do is, and I noticed that I do this because I would think, gosh, I really want to talk about the brainwashing stuff and how we're being manipulated. But I'm spending more of my time helping people wake up. And I'm like, what do I do back and forth? I got these two things pulling at me. And then I had to say, wait a minute. There's really not much of a difference here, because if you can start to find out how you're being manipulated and how your bandwidth is being stolen from you, and your hard drive space and your RAM is being hacked, I mean, basically this is it. You're being hacked and your resources are being used up. And what if those resources are meant to find more about who you are and to wake up and to enjoy life and to see life in a different sense? So it's a balance between those two. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, it's really two parts of the same equation. So the other thing I'm going to do is be working on a podcast and probably more of a membership site of waking up. Okay, you realize this stuff and everything. What can you do to wake up more? What meditations, what techniques, what things that you can start to become aware of to use your resources, your hardware as a metaphor, your computer, to do the things that you want to do, not the things that you've been shaped into doing. And if more and more of humanity does this and we start to realize, maybe that can start to be one of the primary goals that we have as a government, as corporations, as companies, to say, yeah, we got to work, we got to do things, we got to build things, make things, we got to eat, we got to have military, we got to defend. But how can we incorporate that into the experience of the human experience, so that we know that when our kids are coming here, that as we bring new human beings onto this earth, that they're not just about getting things and consuming resources. Yeah, that can happen. That's still going to happen. It's not going to change. But what if we texture it a little bit to say, how do we make this experience good for each human individual? How do we get human beings fed, basic needs and things like that taken care of, but yet If somebody wants to make $1 million or $1 billion, yeah, go for it. Let's make a bigger pie, not just say this is what the pie is. How do we take care of our resources? How do we take care of, I'm more of a conservationist than I am an environmentalist. Taking care of things, taking care of each other. And that to me is what's more important. If we can say, look, we're going to be doing these things. These are human natures. This is what's going to happen. But let's take this technology, let's take this mind technology and the psychological technology and work that somehow into our corporations, into our governments, our personal lives, to say, how do we support each other to make and grow better human beings? And if there's something else beyond us as human beings, if there's a spiritual part of ourselves or something beyond it that you might want to call something different than spirituality, or an evolution waiting to happen inside of us that we're not aware of because we're so distracted by other things, by the magic of the world, what if we start to give that bandwidth and all of a sudden we realize there's something in us waiting to evolve, whether it's spiritual or whether it's just something in us, if you're somebody that believes in evolution, Darwinism, but something else is there. And I know it's there. I've experienced it enough. I've watched enough experience. I've helped enough people get there. So what is it that there are the addictions? And that's what I'm going to read you a little bit about addiction here in a second. What are the addictions that we have, that we're addicted to, that we're brainwashed into? The people that are in the know and have the money and the power can say, let's shape them into this. So it gives me less competition to worry about. So it gives me more power to have. So I am the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain pulling the levers, and everybody thinks I'm the almighty and the powerful, that I'm God. And we got a bunch of people, I think, that are starting to get into a power where when that happens, when they begin to think they're God and they begin to be dictators or oligarchs, groups of people and things like that, they lose the empathy. They don't care. And the people that pay are going to be us. So we need to wake up to this. So let me read you a little bit about this addiction, and then we'll get on to the next podcast. This is by Ruben DeHaan, and he talks about sacred medicine and natural healing. But this article is titled Addiction. It's probably going to take me about 5 minutes to read it. So stick with me. I think you'll get a lot out of it, and I'll work on putting a link in there to it. But if you just do a search on addiction and Reuben, R-E-U-B-E-N, capital D, little e, capital H-A-A-N, Ruben DeHaan, and addiction. Excuse me. You know what? I'm going to take a nice sip of Mount Shasta waters. Hold on one second. As you can probably tell in my voice, a little parched. And one of the reasons I'm not getting real specific and giving you references and things like that, because again, it brings you into the small picture, and then if there's a little bit of it where you go like, that part just didn't make sense to me. I don't think they did that right. We have a tendency with a little piece to just disregard the whole thing. But if we're looking at the big picture, it's hard to disregard the whole thing. And I want to bring you out. I want to zoom you out, so to speak, to look at that, because we've been conditioned to keep zooming in and looking at little pieces, the little pieces of the painting that our awareness looks at, and we don't see the rest of it. We don't see the big picture. And that actually has more of an influence. The environment, the frame, has about 51% influence on us. We do know that from statistics. That's going to have more of an influence than the little things in the picture. So as we look at these little things in our life, if we look at the big overall picture, we're going to see how we're being influenced more by that. To eat cattle in America and not dogs and cats like they do in certain parts of China, and rats and guinea pigs. I could tell you one quick one. I'm sorry to keep going on, but it's going to be an informal podcast. Kathy was telling me about some guy, I guess in New York City, that got arrested for cooking guinea pigs, eating and cooking guinea pigs. And he's Peruvian. Now, I went to Peru. And spoke down in Peru and had a great time. Hung out with Bob Proctor down there. But in Peru, guinea pig is like the number one meat to eat, more so than chicken or anything else. So guinea pig is huge down there. This guy was Peruvian. He didn't know. He comes to America. He doesn't know guinea pigs are pets, and little kids are crying and people are getting upset because excuse me for laughing, but it's like, to him, he's like, what? I've been eating guinea pig all my life. So again, you're vulnerable as an American. You just don't know it because you haven't looked at the big picture, but we're going to look at the big picture more. Addiction. Addiction is defined as the continued use of a mood-altering substance or behavior despite adverse consequences. So what are the adverse consequences for you? Behavior, okay? The consequence does not have to be a physical health hazard as induced by cigarettes, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, etc. Your addiction may be causing you stress. One of the biggest ways to brainwash and use propaganda is through stress, through cortisol, the drugs there. You can do all kinds of things through stress. Your addiction may be causing you stress at a level that will eventually create psychological or neurological issues and brain changes. That's me putting that in there, which often manifest physically as chronic pain, fibromyalgia, dementia, autoimmune disease. Notice the difference in the growth of people being sick and the different sicknesses and the different drugs they have. Cancer, the Cancer Society formed, there was one in, I don't know how many, 1 in 60. I think it's 1 in 2 or something, 1 in 3 now since that formed. So they still make a lot of money though, don't they? Perhaps a bit more accurate description for addiction should be anything that impairs control over a substance, behavior, or preoccupation. When you see it this way, in all likelihood, we all have one addiction or another. Many addictions, I would say. This guy says probably several. Maybe going to the gym is your addiction, or the next tattoo, or having to dress in a designer's clothes, perhaps have the best car, or make a certain amount of money. Even religion can become an addiction. Totally agree with the guy. There's a lot more too that goes on, but it is an addiction. Again, make it happen. Do the behavior, forget about it, make it automatic. That's what your brain wants to do. And marketers know how to take advantage of that. Do you eat healthy as a general principle, or is it so strict and rigid that you do it because you fear the consequences of an unhealthy lifestyle? Does the way you appear, act, behave, or come across to others in any way feed your ego? Anything that preoccupies your time, your money, energy, emotion, even your thoughts is an addiction. Wow. This is in the article. Wow. I think we all have this disorder, but you will see why below. The opposite of addiction is to be in the moment and to have no judgment about any person, thing, or circumstance. So the Secret Meditation DVD that I put out, that was for those of you that have been asking, what's the purpose? Why did you do that? That's the purpose right there. It's an anti-addiction DVD. The opposite of an addiction is to be in the moment and have no judgment about any person, place, or thing, or circumstances, because judgment, which we'll get into, especially on the other side of the equation of waking up, it's automatic. We have been conditioned to judge in certain ways, and that conditioned judgment forces our behavior and our cultural conditioning to do what we're doing. It gets really complicated, but once you get it, it's a bam way. I mean, it's like somebody hitting you in the head with something. It's a big wake up, slapping you in the face. It's a big wake up call, but it's judgment. So the opposite of addiction is to be in the moment and have no judgment about a person, place, or thing, or circumstance. When you no longer try to control the outcome, control is another thing, comes with judgment. When you can simply be in the moment and participate in life rather than control any particular outcome, you have conquered all addiction. One of the problems with addiction is that no matter what your particular addiction is, you have probably found a way to rationalize it. This is something, this is big, rationalizing it. We find ways to rationalize it so you believe it to be a positive attribute, something that works for you. We switch it. We transmute it into something that's positive, but it's a rationalization. For example, you are always working, always thinking about the next deal, the next sale, but it is not an addiction because it is working towards retirement. Or is it to supply for your family? In the proverbial 20/20 hindsight, do you think your children are better off with the latest gadgets because you had money? Or would they have been better off with more of your time? your attention and interest. I added the attention there. If you spend so much time and money trying to look just right, have the designer brand so you can impress, well, whomever it is, but what does that really gain you long term? Stress, with an exclamation mark. If you can't leave the house dirty to take your kids to the park or sit and read them a story or just take a nap because you have worked hard all week and your body is more important than the task, what does the priority issue gain you long term? Stress, exclamation mark. What are the real priorities in life? Or better yet, what pain are you masking? For all addictions, from the same ones to the small ones to the life-threatening ones, are developed of self, soothe some sort of emotional pain. Our psychological profile is set by the time we are 7 years old. Keep in mind, that's another thing we'll get into, is how children are conditioned before 7, and why a lot of parents now are going like, what's going on with the kids? My grandmother's 97 years old, and she's been through many generations. And she says, I'll tell you, there's something with this generation that's different than any of the other ones I've seen before. She goes, there's always differences, but there's something really, really different with this generation. And yeah, there is. And it's how they've been educated and using stress. Anyways, our psychological profile is set by the time we are 7 years old. Keep in mind that this does not mean you were abused per se. Our mental profile was set by the perception of what you thought was real or true. Think about China. If we did not receive the love, time, or acceptance as a child, we develop ways to control that and try to fulfill it. This is the root of your addiction. Talk therapy, psychology, AA meetings, rehab, none of these are going to help fix that root. Medication and antidepressants certainly do not contribute to a cure. They may help you cope, but if you do not heal the old emotional pain that drove you to the addiction, you will never truly heal. Again, that's what I'm doing, coaching and things. I don't care what it is for. You come in for coaching, we're going to get back into something that is going to be one of those unresolved conflicts that drove you to addiction, the emotional pain. Once that's cleared up, once you see another side of that, you'd be surprised at how the dominoes fall in your favor and can help you. But the society that we're living in and the media that we're living in seek to keep provoking that and keep poking that and keep getting you to do certain behaviors in a certain way. They know this is going on with you, and they don't want you to wake up to this. They want you to continue to do the behavior because they've set it up to nick it a little bit. And when I mean nick it, it's like electricity. You see, if you got electricity coming to your house and one of your neighbors doesn't have it, or you got cable, and they go in at nighttime and they hook up, they tap into your wire, and they pull it out. Your electricity and your bill's up, and you're like, well, we haven't increased you. They're nicking it. They're taking a little bit out. So the society that we live in has found ways to keep you in your behaviors and then nick it a little bit to take a little bit of profit off the top. But they're starting to get a little greedy because they want a lot more. And that's one of the reasons I'm doing the show, is not to stop them from nicking it, not to stop it from happening, but to stop it from getting out of control. And it is beginning to get out of control. Just a little more paragraph here and we're done. Every emotional pain creates an actual chemical response in your brain, and our addictions literally create chemical responses to satisfy the illusion of happiness. The illusion of happiness. We can set that up to be eating dogs and cats in China, or cattle and chicken and pigs here in America. We can set it up to eat human beings in Borneo. It can be set up all different kinds of ways, and you will rationalize it. We're American. We don't do this. We're American. This will never happen. Nazi Germany will never happen here. We're Americans. We got the internet. We got TV. We got Dan Rather. We got Brian Williams. He'll tell us the truth. We got Fox News. They'll tell us the truth. And I'm not saying they don't tell you the truth, but I'm saying they can skew it a little bit to make it seem a certain way. So every emotional pain is an actual chemical response in your brain, and our addictions literally create chemical responses to satisfy the illusion of happiness. From drug addicts to neat freaks, to OCD, to workaholic, to religious fanatic, they are all symptoms of chemical responses induced to help us cope with the side effect of the original pain mechanism. We are invested in not clearing that up. The spiritual walk, what I've discovered, what I do in my therapy, what I'm doing with my DVDs, is there are ways to get around that. There are ways to heal the original emotional pain, to transmute it, to transform it, to see it in different ways, to start to wake you up from it. But we have a society that is invested, a media that is invested in not waking you up, but continuing to do that so they can nick a little bit from it. Same way a dam works, electrical dam. We've got pressure and water, and we set it up that we can make it benefit us. And they set this emotional trauma up to benefit the society. I think it's kind of sick. We're human beings. It's going to happen one way or the other. We're going to need to do it. People are going to need to help people and heal people to different things and be able to nick. But we need to wake up and say, what amount are we willing to tolerate? How much is abuse? How much is propaganda and brainwashing? And do we want to continue to let that happen? Just about done. Excuse me. While the psychological profile, the old emotional pain, is different for each person, the chemicals responsible for any addiction are almost always neurotransmitters in some combination. Those are very often additionally disrupted by the childhood vaccines. Vaccines is going to be something I'm going to get into, whether you believe in vaccines or not. The propaganda that is being used is the absolute best. Or worst, however way you want to look at it. It is the most advanced technology of propaganda I have ever seen. So wherever you fall with vaccine is fine with me, but at least be aware of the propaganda, the background and the foreground propaganda that's being used there. Again, I've got family members that are experts at vaccines and giving vaccines and stuff like that. But you dig deeper into it and you'll find some things that are going on. But whether you believe in it or not, find out what's being used to get you to think about it in a certain way. And then make up your own mind. My interest is realize how they're getting you to think in a certain way and how they're shaping that behavior and how they're astroturfing the behavior, setting it up to make you seem like everybody else thinks that way when 75% of the people don't think that way. And I'll bring up some recent things that actual proof was 75% of the people are against something, but through astroturfing, making you think that you're being one of the 75% through Facebook, through different media, they were able to change the numbers around because people go like, geez, I don't want to be an outlier. I don't want to be outside of the group. I want to be part of the group. I guess I'll change my belief. I guess I'll go for my belief system this way. So what your natural belief is, what you really, when you're awake or when you just naturally believe something, most people, 75% is a pretty big majority, believe in a certain way, but yet they're able to manipulate that. Just know about it, know what's happening, know how they're doing it, back up, make another decision on it. I think that's about it. He basically says, in addition, very important addition, one of the best things to regain emotional control is fasting. Fasting is just not about eating. Fasting is about me getting off Facebook. Fasting is about me getting off my internet, my laptop. Fasting is about certain ways of looking at things. The fasting is taking some time from sports and then coming back. The food analogy is great because when you do fast, it's rough for a few days, but then you start to feel different. And if you go back and eat some crap food, you'll know right away what that food's doing to you. But we become like the frog with a certain amount of degrees. We become used to eating that food. And we become used to the pain that food causes us. And we continue to do it because we adapt to it. We're creatures of adaptation. We human beings adapt really, really well to pain and to pleasure. And we adapt to addiction really, really well. And he says, beyond that, start with books and teachings by Wayne Dyer, Eckhart Tolle, Mark Ryan. I'll add that in there. I'm here to do the best I can to wake you up as I've woken up, and others before me have helped wake me up. And I'd like to keep this part of the equation free. And the other part about the waking up, maybe I can nick it a little bit, and make a little bit of a living from helping wake people up and finding out who they are, but also letting them know what's being used against them. There was an old DVD set it wasn't a DVD. It was a cassette tape, old cassette tape before CDs, and it was called Consumer Protection for the Mind. And I don't remember who did it, but it was an NLP person. I think they were out of NLP Comprehensive in Denver, Colorado at the time. But this is kind of like what I want this show to be, a little consumer protection for the mind, to say, do you want to eat GMO food or you want to eat organic food? That's going to be another one. We'll talk about foods. And again, it's not whether you can eat whether they're good or bad. I don't want to kind of get into that. I have personal beliefs about that. You'll hear those personal beliefs starting to come out. But I'm going to do my best to pull out of that and say, look, I know people don't believe the same way that I believe. And I've believed completely on the left and liberal side, and I've been completely on the right and ultra-conservative, and I find myself more libertarian now. And I know that the right does a lot of manipulation, but I got to tell you, I know from experience in selling stuff and doing trainings and teaching that the left has really invested a lot of money with people that I know, and I know what's going on in this manipulation, and so that's why I have a tendency to go more after the left right now. I would look at it from a libertarian point of view, kind of somewhere in the middle, an American, a human being, but to say, hey, I'm going to go after those thoughts and ideas and that manipulation. And right now, like I said, the left, the media, again, they're using this technology at a level that is unsurpassed in human history. And unfortunately, there are human beings that like to take advantage of this. And if you don't think there's any Hitlers or Stalins or Maos or Pol Pots in the world today that are really close to the top, getting ready to take full advantage of this, then you're crazy. You're the nut. And maybe you shouldn't listen to the show because it'll just upset you. Go back to sleep. Take the blue pill. Go back to sleep. Those that want to take a little bit of the red pill and wake up, I'm not saying we're going to have a beautiful utopic world. And I'm just saying let's put the brakes on a little bit and see what's being done to us and make some decisions and direct our own path a little bit more than people that get a lot of power. We just know throughout history that people get too much power. There's kings, and that's why our country was set up so to have so many counties and so many sheriffs and so that it didn't centralize. But it's centralizing really, really fast, and centralization is not a good thing, especially when it comes to politics and people, because the people that sit on the top of the centralization, the eye of the top of the pyramid, usually cannot control the power. If we think of the Lord of the Rings, the ring, only certain people could handle it. Most human beings, most people could not handle the ring. Why? That's not just a false story. That person wrote that because they know that kind of power. So we have to, as human beings, make a decision to neutralize the power. When you put in so many nuclear rods in a nuclear power plant, you go past critical mass, it starts to heat up. And as we know with Fukushima and 3 Mile Island, that if those rods get out of control, there is a certain level with human beings, that a certain level of power and control, like Lord of the Rings, something starts to take over, and it's not good. So whether it's a group of human beings, an oligarch, a monopoly, whatever it is with corporations, with politicians, sorry, but there's too many rods going into the nuclear reactor of government and corporations, and the combination of them together, which is fascism. Corporate-run government is fascism. The rods are heating up. It's starting to boil. We're getting ready for a meltdown. It's my personal opinion. You don't have to believe it. But we just need to, as human beings, say, look, we can't handle that kind of power. We got to kind of divest it a little bit. We got to spread it out a little bit more. Otherwise, it's going to heat up, and that much power gets in the hands of a group of people or one person, and there will be meltdowns, and it's not going to bode good for the average person. This is Mark J. Ryan. Hope you enjoyed the first Brainwashing Central. Very long. Hopefully the other ones are a little bit shorter, and we're going to start taking it piece by piece and keep referring back to the big picture. Let me know what you think. Share it with your friends and family that you think might be interested in this, and maybe take another look at it, because we need to do something really quick, really fast, and not blame right and wrong and everything. We just need to look at the process of how this is being done and wake up as human beings and say, do we want to do this? Do we know we're vulnerable to this? How do we put in stop gaps? How do we put in protections that'll pull those rods out before that sucker overheats? This is Mark J. Ryan with Brainwashing Central. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.